The SCP Foundation zones contain thousands of anomalous creatures and objects. All of the objects are examined by scientists whenever possible in order to identify and explain the forces that give them their unusual properties. The research is often hindered by the danger of the objects themselves, or due to a difficulty in finding a scientific explanation for their anomalous properties. SCP-250 is one of these more complex objects. It's a living dinosaur skeleton and belongs to the Euclid class. The creature acts aggressively towards people. This makes it quite difficult to examine the object and figure out why it's animated. There's a joke among Foundation staff that it was reanimated by a wizard. SCP-250 looks like the fossilized but mobile remains of an Allosaurus. These predators lived on Earth during the Jurassic period about 145 to 155 million years ago. The largest of them reached 11 meters in length and weighed over 4 tons. SCP-250 is completely devoid of muscle tissue. It consists of 153 fossilized dinosaur bones and 14 artificially created bones. These are made of plaster and fiberglass. This skeleton is animated by an unknown force and behaves just as a living animal would. It must hunt, eat, and sleep, otherwise the object becomes quite aggressive. This is a natural reaction for a hungry and tired animal, especially a predator such as this one. To meet these needs, SCP-250 was placed in an enclosure that mimics its natural habitat as much as possible. It takes up a 50 by 50 meter plot. The walls of the enclosure are 15 meters high and 1 meter thick and are covered with steel plates. The enclosure recreates the additions of a steppe ecosystem, including the appropriate vegetation and climate. According to protocol, the plants are cared for on a weekly basis. The temperature in the enclosure simulates the changes that occur in the steppe between day and night. During the day, it ranges from 20 to 28 degrees Celsius, and at night it drops down to 10 to 14 degrees. Meanwhile, the humidity is maintained at about 8%. Despite not having any internal organs, SCP-250 behaves as if it does, and as such, it means it needs food. While observing the skeleton, it was decided to give it one live pig every 2 days for hunting. This was enough to satisfy the object's apparent need for food. SCP-250 hunts the animals and eats it. Due to its lack of internal organs, the object simply crushes the food with its jaws. The chewed pieces fall through the spaces between its bones. And then, the creature just ignores them. The predator goes to sleep every morning at the provisional nighttime. Only then are Foundation staff allowed to enter its territory, no sooner than an hour after it falls asleep. Specialists clean up the remains from its daily meal and also clean the object itself. All parts of the skeleton need to be kept clean. The cleaning procedure involves using compressed air and brooms. Any attempt to remove bones from SCP-250's skeleton, whether a real or artificial bone, must be prevented. This increases the risk of the object waking up, and then injuring or killing any employees in the enclosure. It's been well established that the object will try in earnest to eat any living thing in its lair, because it sees all living creatures as its prey. It's also unknown whether SCP-250's bones could be damaged if it was placed in a situation where a real dinosaur would be injured. The object's stable behavior is ensured if standard protocol is followed. This stable behavior contributes to paleontologists' scientific understanding of what the Allosaurus life looks like. We know that the skeleton itself didn't show any abnormal properties for a long time. About 80% of its fossilized bones were discovered in the 20th century. For security reasons, the excavation site location and the exact date of discovery are not disclosed, nor is the name of the museum that the skeleton was transferred to. In that museum, the skeleton was assembled and then presented as part of an exhibition. There still remains the question of whether the real skeleton was put on display, or if this was a copy. Almost all museums around the world tend to create plaster or plastic copies for display, while the real fossils are stored in special rooms in order to preserve them. However, the authenticity of the object's skeleton is not in question. It does in fact consist of fossilized dinosaur remains. The object's anomalous properties made their first appearance in the 2000s. One night, the skeleton came to life and killed an unknown man who had broken into the museum. On top of that, on the same night, a female paleontologist's office in the museum building was destroyed. No one has seen her since the incident. The mysterious nighttime visitor's body was so mutilated by the creature that it was impossible to figure out who he was. But the remains have been clearly identified as male. At the time of the incident, there were already Foundation employees working undercover at the museum. They brought in a task force, neutralized SCP-250, and then deleted any surveillance footage that might have shown the skeleton coming to life. The museum staff, possible witnesses, and police officers who arrived at the scene the next morning were also interviewed. The law enforcement agencies were only interested in the corpse and the doctor's disappearance. The exhibit's disappearance was noted as being a possible reason for an intruder to break into the museum. All respondents were treated with amnesiacs. Foundation staff also searched the doctor's trashed office and looked through her personal belongings. Among the documents, they found part of a scientific article concerning the skeleton. The paper stated that the skeleton's current classification as an Allosaurus fragilis might have been inaccurate. Due to SCP-250's high level of aggression and its attempt to devour anything alive, scientists were unable to conduct the necessary research. As such, the force that animates the object is still unknown. Nevertheless, the Foundation specialists have managed to come up with a few possible explanations. The Foundation zones contain a large number of infectious agents, so one theory might assume that an unknown smart virus could have set the skeleton in motion, but this theory has not been confirmed. First, the virus has to be actively spreading for this to be true, and no such cases of the virus have been recorded. Experts conducted an experiment by placing several animal skeletons, including those of a dinosaur, into a chamber with the virus, and none of them came to life. Second, even if a virus unknown to science couldn't affect dead tissue, they all require use of a host's cells for vital functions in order to survive. Even if the virus had been programmed to completely overtake an organism, a skeleton isn't an organism, it's just the skeleton. One of the researchers suggested that a virus could have caused the skeleton to be resurrected if the dinosaur had died no earlier than 50 to 100 years ago. In order to do this, the creature would have had to time travel from the past, or it would have had to be recreated through genetic engineering. The probability that both events occurred simultaneously, a dinosaur being cloned and a dinosaur time traveling from the past and becoming infected with an unknown virus, is extremely small. On top of that, Foundation agents habitually track suspicious activity of organizations and individuals alike. The Foundation would have already known if there was a farm of living fossils somewhere on Earth. Theories that cited alien life forms or creatures from other dimensions didn't gain much traction. The original data is taken into consideration. These theories are also regarded as unlikely. One noteworthy thing, those Foundation employees who were working undercover in the museum had reported the appearance of Global Occult Coalition representatives. Because this information is not directly rated to SCP-250, it wasn't entered into the object database. GOC representatives also made contact with Foundation operatives who had worked on the scene after the skeleton had come to life. They're reported to have recently come into contact with the O5 Council to request access to SCP-250. There's still no official correspondence of this request. The Global Occult Coalition and the SCP Foundation regularly work together to capture and detain certain objects. It was the GOC who developed the mystical mechanism for containing SCP-2845, otherwise known as God. This coalition counteracts manifestations of hostile phenomena throughout the world. The paranormal, the parascientific, and the paratemporal. One of the main principles of the Global Occult Coalition is maintaining the highest level of secrecy possible. Secrecy not only from civil organizations, but also organizations with link to the GOC, like the SCP Foundation. This is why there was no precise data regarding the reasons for the GOC's interest in SCP-250. But there is probably some truth in the Foundation staff's jokes that the skeleton had been reanimated by a wizard. The answer may lie in a poem written by the occultist Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, titled The Crocodile or the War of Good and Evil. In the poem, the mystic described the functioning of the so-called magic chain. One of the characters tells of a speech he heard from a hierophant of black magic. As he spoke, a beam of light appeared from outside. It entered the priest's heart and shot back out of the opposite direction. The hero followed the current and came up upon a dungeon, where he found 14 people in iron chairs sitting in a circle. In the center of the circle was another, higher chair for the hierophant. There were rays of light coming in from each of the members' assembly, and the high priest himself. The rays converged over the hierophant's chair. Notably, there are 14 artificial bones in SCP-250's skeleton, which corresponds to the number of participants in the ritual described above. According to the Global Occult Coalition, the hierophant acts as sort of an astro-psychic battery that collects and redirects energy. Sometimes such a chain can create a new astral being, or even use a person in place of one as a medium. Bones also have great meaning in occult practices. Warlocks were known to use them to create artifacts with paranormal properties. Many SCP Foundation employees are skeptical towards the Global Occult Coalition, but you have to admit, its work with specific objects has certainly been effective. Currently, they are successfully holding a number of objects, including SCP-1374 and SCP-1583. The GOC's significant interest in the skeleton all but confirms the involvement of parascientific forces in his reanimation. In particular, the Undersecretary General for Occult Security, D.C. Alfinay, personally visited the SCP-250 holding area. This was after a report that the dinosaur skeleton had been sold at an auction in Paris. According to scientists, the bones that went for 2 million euros belonged to a previously unknown species of carnivorous Allosaurus. According to paleontologists, the owner of this skeleton and an Allosaurus are about as similar as a man and a gorilla. The person who bought the skeleton wished to remain anonymous, but he promised to rent the remains to the museum. This data suggests that a modified magic chain ceremony was performed in the museum that housed SCP-250. For some unknown reason, all the participants placed their artifacts, bones made of plaster and fiberglass, in the dinosaur skeleton. Notably, the missing paleontologist records stated that SCP-250's skeleton differs from known Allosaurus species, as does the skeleton sold at the auction in Paris. The doctor herself could have been part of an occult organization, or could have been injured in a ceremony gone awry. Or she could have come across this mysterious group performing their rites in the museum, and then been eliminated by them. The experiment with SCP-250 was apparently unsuccessful. A second skeleton was purchased for a new attempt, which poses the threat of creating another SCP object. Foundation scientists still haven't been able to figure out why the skeleton came to life, so it remains unknown how to deal with a potentially modified SCP-250. As it stands, there's a high chance that the Foundation will be cooperating with the Global Occult Coalition regarding this object. If you have any ideas regarding scientific explanations for the dinosaur's reanimation, or about the mystical ritual held in the museum, share them in the comments down below. Like this video and be sure to subscribe to our channel, so you can stay up to date about the SCP Foundation's most dangerous and classified cases.